He walked into the jewelry store to buy a ring for another woman. He never expected to find his ex-wife standing behind the counter. He definitely never expected the little girl balanced on her hip, staring at him with his own eyes. The door swung open as Victor Zhang stepped inside, his two bodyguards falling into position behind him. The smell of polished wood and warm gold light wrapped around him instantly. He stopped just inside the entrance, one expensive shoe on the marble floor, his driver still waiting by the curb outside. In 10 years of running Asia's most powerful luxury conglomerate, Victor had never personally shopped for anything. Not suits, not cars, not rings. But something had pulled him here today, something quiet and unnamed. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. The boutique was too small for a man like him. Glass cases lined every wall, filled with rings that caught the light like tiny promises. Soft music played from somewhere he couldn't see. And then he saw her. She stood behind the counter with her back to him, curly hair pulled neatly back, adjusting a display with careful hands. Her store uniform fit perfectly. She looked like she belonged here, like she had built something quiet and good in a world far away from his. Then the little girl on her hip turned around. And Victor Zhang forgot how to breathe. The store was the kind of place that made you speak softly without being told to. Everything gleamed. The glass cases ran along both walls, filled with rings that caught the light and threw it back in tiny sparks. The air smelled clean and expensive, like cedar and something floral he couldn't name. Soft classical music floated through the space, barely louder than a whisper. Victor stood just inside the entrance and let his eyes move slowly around the room. That's when he saw her. She had her back to him, leaning slightly over a display case near the far end of the counter. Her curly hair was pulled back tight, and she wore a neat black uniform with a small gold pin on the lapel. Her hands moved carefully, adjusting a row of rings with the kind of focus that meant she loved what she did. She was humming, just barely, under her breath. Victor didn't move. He hadn't seen Brielle Thompson in 5 years. Not once. Not a photo, not a message, nothing. And now here she was, 12 feet away, in a jewelry store he had walked into by chance, looking like she had never needed him at all. He should have turned around. He knew that. Every logical part of his brain said it clearly, but his feet didn't listen. Then the little girl shifted on her hip. She had been facing the other direction, one small hand gripping the edge of Brielle's collar. But something made her turn, maybe a sound, maybe nothing at all, and suddenly she was looking directly at Victor with wide, dark, serious eyes. His eyes. The shape of them, the stillness behind them. The way she didn't look away, just studied him like she was trying to figure something out. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. She wore a yellow cardigan with small white buttons and had one shoe slightly looser than the other. Victor felt the floor shift under him. Brielle turned a second later. Maybe she felt the change in the air. Maybe Layla's grip tightened. Either way, she turned, and the moment she saw his face, every bit of color drained from hers. The small cloth she'd been holding dropped onto the glass case. Neither of them spoke. The music kept playing. Somewhere near the back, a phone rang once and stopped. Then Brielle straightened. She adjusted Layla on her hip with one smooth, practiced move, and when she spoke, her voice was low and steady, the kind of calm that takes years to build. "You need to leave, Victor." He looked at the little girl, still staring at him with those quiet, familiar eyes. He didn't move. The door of the SUV clicked shut behind him, and the noise of the city disappeared. Victor sat in the back seat and said nothing. His driver glanced in the rearview mirror, waiting for an address, a direction, anything. Victor stared straight ahead. After a long moment, the driver looked forward again and stayed quiet. The engine idled softly. Outside, people moved along the sidewalk the way they always did, fast, unbothered, somewhere to be. A woman pushed a stroller. Two men in suits walked past talking without looking up. The world kept moving like nothing had just happened. Victor's hands rested on his knees. Still, controlled. The same way he sat in boardrooms when a deal was falling apart and he needed everyone else to believe it wasn't. But his mind was anything but still. Layla, the name came to him from nowhere, and he didn't even know how he knew it. Maybe he'd heard it somewhere in the store, some half-second before everything collapsed. He turned it over slowly. Layla, a little girl with a yellow cardigan and one loose shoe and eyes that looked exactly like the ones he saw in the mirror every morning. He started doing the math, without meaning to. 3 years old, maybe close to 4, which meant Brielle had been pregnant when she left. He remembered the month she disappeared, a quiet Tuesday in October, 5 years ago, when her resignation letter arrived at the office and her phone went straight to voicemail, and his father had told him, calmly and without blinking, that it was for the best. Victor had believed him. He hadn't fought it, hadn't demanded answers, hadn't gotten in his car and driven to her apartment. He had stood in his corner office on the 40th floor, looked out at the city he was building his name across, and decided that Brielle's silence meant she had chosen to go. He had told himself that for 5 years. His father's lawyers had shown up 2 weeks after she left, with documents and a clean explanation and a new direction for the company. Victor had signed everything placed in front of him. He had restructured, expanded, moved forward. He had been so focused on what he was building that he never once stopped to ask what had been taken from him, or what she had been forced to carry alone. 3 years old, maybe close to 4. The driver shifted slightly. "Sir, where to?" Victor looked out the window at the jewelry store. The warm gold light still glowed behind the glass. Somewhere inside, Brielle was straightening rings and holding a little girl with his eyes. "Just wait," he said quietly. And he didn't look away. His assistant said something as he walked past her desk. He didn't hear it. He went straight to his office, closed the door behind him, and stood at the window for a long time. Seoul spread out 40 floors below, glass towers, moving traffic, cranes building something new on the eastern edge of the skyline. His city, his world, everything he had chosen. He turned away from it. "Cancel everything," he said through the intercom. "The rest of today, all of it." A pause. "Sir, you have 3 calls scheduled in the Park family dinner at..." "Everything." He sat down at his desk. His phone lit up with messages from his fiancée, Maylin. He turned it face down without reading them. Then he opened his laptop, went to the company's private archive, and typed in a name he hadn't said out loud in 5 years. Brielle Thompson. The files came up slowly, like they had been waiting somewhere dusty and undisturbed. He opened the first one. Financial misconduct allegations, dated October 5 years ago. 2 pages of claims, unauthorized transfers, access to restricted accounts, signatures that didn't quite match. His father's legal team had presented it all so cleanly, so neatly packaged. Here is the problem, here is the evidence, here is the solution. Victor had accepted it like a briefing report. He read through it again now, slowly this time, the way he should have read it then. His eyes moved across every line. He pulled up the original account logs, the dates, the access records. He cross-referenced the document's signatures against Brielle's personnel file, the one HR had archived when she resigned. The more he read, the colder the room felt. The timestamps didn't line up. 2 of the account access records showed activity during a weekend when Brielle had been at a conference in another city, a conference he himself had asked her to attend on behalf of the company. There were emails in the file, but the metadata had been stripped. The resignation letter, the one his father had handed him that Tuesday morning, used a font Brielle had never used in 4 years of internal communication. He had never noticed any of it. Because he hadn't looked. He had trusted the people who handed him the story, and he had never once picked it apart the way he would have picked apart any other deal that didn't feel right. Victor leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. She hadn't been guilty. The evidence had been built around her, piece by people who knew exactly what they were doing. And he had let them, not because he believed it fully, but because questioning it would have meant questioning his father. and he had never been brave enough for that. Until now. The phone rang at 6:14 in the evening. Victor looked at the screen. His father's name glowed against the dark surface of the desk. He let it ring twice, then picked up. "Where are you?" Chairman Zhang's voice was smooth and unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once felt the need to rush. "My office." "Good, stay there. I'll send someone too." "What do you need, father?" A short pause, not long enough to mean anything. Just long enough to remind Victor, who was used to controlling the pace of every conversation. "One of your security detail mentioned a stop this afternoon, a jewelry boutique on Chengdam." Another pause. "He also mentioned you stayed in the car for 40 minutes after coming back out." Victor said nothing. "I understand it was unexpected," his father continued. "Seeing her, but I need you to hear me clearly, Victor. Whatever you're thinking right now, let it go. The girl is not your concern." The words landed flat, like something rehearsed. "The engagement stands," his father said. "Mei Lin's family has already been patient through 2 postponements. The merger vote is in 3 weeks. Every major shareholder will be watching how you present yourself between now and then. You cannot afford disruption. Not now." Victor stood and walked to the window. The city below was moving into evening, lights beginning to replace the last of the daylight. He could see a small park 2 blocks west. A woman was walking a dog along the path. A child ran ahead of her, arms out. He watched them until they disappeared around a bend. "The merger cannot be disrupted," his father repeated, softer now, almost gentle. The tone he used when he wanted to sound like he was being reasonable. "You have worked too hard, Victor. We have both worked too hard. Do not let one unexpected afternoon unravel what took a decade to build." Victor thought about the files still open on his laptop. The mismatched timestamps, the stripped metadata, the resignation letter in the wrong font. He thought about a little girl in a yellow cardigan with 1 loose shoe. "I hear you," Victor said. "Good, then. I'll speak to you soon, father." He ended the call. He stood there for a moment, holding the phone in his hand. His reflection looked back at him faintly in the dark glass, jacket still on, expression steady, jaw set. His hand wasn't shaking. He noticed that, 5 years ago, a call like that would have realigned him completely. His father's voice had always been enough to close every door he'd started to open. But not tonight. He set the phone down, walked back to his desk, and picked up the number for his personal attorney. The back entrance was a plain steel door in a narrow alley behind the boutique. A single light glowed above it. Victor knocked once and waited. Brielle opened the door without a word and stepped aside to let him in. The store was different after closing. Quieter, smaller somehow. The main lights were off, but the display cases still glowed softly along the walls, the rings inside catching the light the way they always did, like they didn't know the day was over. Victor stood near the door and didn't move further in. He hadn't earned more space than that. Brielle crossed her arms and leaned against the far counter. She had changed out of her uniform into a simple gray sweater. Her hair was still pulled back. She looked tired in the way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Layla's with my neighbor," she said. "You have an hour." He nodded. She didn't make him tea, didn't offer him a seat. She just looked at him for a moment like she was deciding something, and then she started talking. She told him about the meeting, the one his father's lawyers had called her into 3 days after she had taken a quiet pregnancy test alone in her apartment bathroom. She told him about the allegations, how they were laid out in a folder like something official, something final. She told him about the visa warning, how one of the lawyers had mentioned, almost casually, that her work status could become complicated if things turned difficult. She told him about the words his father had used personally, at the end, when the lawyers had stepped out of the room and it was just the 2 of them. She said his father had looked at her without anger, without cruelty, just certainty. He had told her that any child she brought into this would carry the weight of the scandal forever, that the Zhang name would bury her and the baby with her before that child ever had a chance to stand up. The room was very quiet when she finished. Victor looked at the floor, Then he looked up. "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" Brielle didn't hesitate. She didn't look away either. "Because I already knew what you'd choose." The words were soft. That made them worse. He wanted to argue. He opened his mouth and then closed it again, because somewhere underneath the protest forming in his chest, he knew she wasn't wrong. He had stood in that office 5 years ago and accepted every word his father handed him. He had chosen the cleaner story over the harder truth. She had known him well enough to know that before she even walked out the door. Victor sat down on a small stool near the entrance, put his elbows on his knees, and said nothing for a long time. The silence between them stretched out long enough that Brielle finally pushed off from the counter and looked at him directly. "So what's different now, Victor?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was something harder than anger. It was tired and careful and completely done with the version of him that needed to be handled gently. "You've seen her once. You've heard what happened. What makes tonight different from any other night you could have looked closer and didn't?" It was a fair question. He didn't try to answer it with words. He picked up his phone, found Mei Lin's number, and called. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and slightly surprised. He didn't ease into it. He didn't soften the edges or build toward it slowly. He told her clearly the engagement was over, not because of anything she had done, not because the timing was wrong. Because he should never have asked her in the first place, and she deserved better than a man who had said yes to her the same way he said yes to everything his family placed in front of him. Mei Lin went quiet. Then she said his father would hear about this within the hour. "I know," Victor said. "I'm sorry, Mei Lin, genuinely." He ended the call. Brielle was watching him. Her arms were still crossed, but something in her posture had shifted, just slightly, the way a door shifts when the lock inside it finally releases. He scrolled to his attorney's number and made the second call. His attorney answered immediately. "I need a full investigation," Victor said. 5 years back, every document connected to Brielle Thompson's removal from Zhang Holdings, the misconduct allegations, the visa communications, the resignation letter, every name involved, every communication trail. He paused. "Start with my father." His attorney didn't ask questions. He said he'd have a team working before midnight. Victor ended the call, silenced his phone completely, and set it face down on the counter beside him. Somewhere across the city, his father was already being told. The board would know by morning. The merger timeline would fracture. He understood all of that clearly, and he felt none of the fear that should have come with it. He looked up at Brielle. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything," he said. "I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I'm not asking you to forgive anything." He kept his voice steady, but the steadiness cost him something. "I'm asking for one thing. Let me meet Layla properly, on your terms, at whatever pace you decide." Brielle looked at him for a long moment. Outside, a car passed through the alley, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. It was the most honest answer she could have given him, and he took it. He arrived 20 minutes early. His attorney walked beside him, a leather folder tucked under one arm, expression neutral. 2 board members were already in the hallway outside the conference room when Victor stepped out of the elevator. They looked at him the way people look at something they don't quite recognize anymore, familiar shape, different energy. He nodded at them and walked past. Chairman Zhang was already seated at the head of the table when Victor entered. His father looked up without surprise, without alarm, the way he always did, like he had already decided how every room he sat in would end. 3 senior board members flanked him on both sides. The company's head of legal sat near the door with a notepad open and a pen he hadn't used yet. Victor set nothing down. He didn't take his usual seat. His attorney opened the folder and placed a single stack of documents on the table, neatly, without ceremony. 5 years ago, Victor said, financial misconduct allegations were filed against Brielle Thompson, who was at the time a senior director at this company, and my wife. He kept his voice level, the same tone he used when presenting quarterly results. Those allegations were fabricated. No one spoke. He walked them through it without rushing. The mismatched timestamps, the stripped metadata, the visa pressure routed through a law firm with direct ties to two people currently sitting in the room. The emails recovered by his attorney's team, sent from an internal account that had since been deleted but not fully wiped. His father's name appeared in 3 of them clearly, without ambiguity. Victor looked at his father when he reached that part. Chairman Zhang's expression didn't break, but something behind it did, something small and almost invisible that Victor recognized only because he had spent his entire life learning to read that face. Brielle Thompson's name will be formally cleared, Victor said. A public statement from this company will be issued by end of week. My daughter will be publicly acknowledged. He paused, just long enough. And anyone in this room who participated in what happened 5 years ago should speak to their own lawyers before they speak to me. The silence was total. Then Chairman Zhang pushed his chair back from the table. The sound of it scraped across the room. He stood, straightened his jacket with both hands, and walked to the door without looking at his son. He didn't say a word. The door closed behind him. Victor looked around the table at the board members who remained. No one had moved. Mr. Lim, the eldest, cleared his throat and reached slowly for the documents. "We'll need to review these carefully," he said. "Take all the time you need," Victor replied. And he sat down for the first time. He got there 15 minutes early. No driver, no security detail waiting by the curb. He had parked 2 streets over and walked, hands in the pockets of a pair of jeans he hadn't worn in over a year. No jacket, no title, nothing that announced who he was or what he controlled. The park was small and unhurried. Old trees lined the path, their branches just beginning to fill in with spring green. A few people moved along the walking trail. An elderly man sat reading on a bench near the entrance. Pigeons gathered hopefully near a rubbish bin. Victor found them near the pond. Brielle was seated on a blanket spread over the grass, her legs folded to one side. Layla knelt at the edge of the blanket with a small paper bag of bread crusts, tearing off pieces with intense concentration and tossing them toward the ducks gathered at the water's edge. She was narrating something to herself under her breath, a quiet, ongoing story that she seemed to find completely reasonable. Victor stopped a few steps away and watched her for a moment before either of them noticed him. Brielle looked up first. She didn't smile, but she didn't tense the way she once had. She said something softly to Layla and touched her shoulder. Layla turned around. She looked at him the same way she had in the jewelry store, those still, dark, careful eyes moving over his face like she was reading something written there. Then she stood up slowly, bread bag still in hand, and studied him from a slightly better angle. Brielle said quietly, "Layla, this is your daddy. Do you remember what we talked about this morning?" Layla nodded once, very seriously. Then she looked back at Victor. "Why didn't you come before?" she asked. It was a simple question. 4 years old, and she had already found the center of it. Victor crouched down so they were the same height and took a breath. "Because I made a mistake," he said. "A big one. I didn't know you were here, and the moment I found out, I came." Layla thought about this with the kind of focus most adults reserve for complicated problems. Her nose scrunched slightly. Then she seemed to reach some small internal conclusion and held out the bread bag toward him. "You have to throw it far," she said, "or they won't come." Victor took a piece of bread from the bag. His throat was tight, but his hands were steady. He drew his arm back and threw it as far across the water as he could. 3 ducks immediately turned and raced toward it. Layla gasped with delight, grabbed another piece, and threw her own. And just like that, he was beside her. When the bread bag was empty, Layla declared the ducks officially fed and ran back to the blanket to report this to no one in particular. Brielle folded the blanket into a neat square and moved to the bench near the water's edge. Victor sat on the other end, leaving space between them. Not uncomfortable space, just honest space. The kind that said they both understood where things were and weren't yet. Layla did not stay still for long. She ran back to the pond, then back to the bench, then back to the pond again, chasing a duck that moved with a calm confidence that made it clear she was never going to catch it. She knew this too. It didn't stop her. She laughed every time it waddled just out of reach, a full, unguarded laugh that startled pigeons and made the elderly man 2 benches over look up from his book and smile. Victor's phone buzzed steadily in his pocket. He didn't take it out. He knew what was on it. His attorney had sent a summary that morning. The board had accepted the documentation. The merger timeline had been suspended. The Park family had quietly begun distancing themselves from the Zhang name. His father had issued a brief public statement that said nothing and meant less. 3 journalists had already called asking for comment on the engagement cancellation and the acknowledgement of a previously unknown daughter. A PR crisis was assembling itself somewhere across the city without him. He watched Layla plant her feet wide and point at the duck like she was giving it a serious warning. He left his phone in his pocket. Brielle was quiet beside him. She wasn't cold and she wasn't warm. She was somewhere in the careful middle where people sit when they've been hurt enough to be patient. He respected it. He didn't try to fill it with words. Then Layla abandoned the duck entirely, ran back to the bench at full speed, and climbed up into the space between them with the focused urgency of someone who had decided exactly where she needed to be. She sat back against the bench, legs straight out in front of her because they didn't reach the edge, and looked at the pond like she owned it. Brielle glanced across at Victor. He looked back at her. Neither of them moved away. Layla reached over without looking and rested her small hand on top of his. Just set it there, easy and unbothered, the way children touch things they've decided belong to them. Victor looked down at her hand on his. He didn't trust himself to speak. It was, he thought, the only deal he had ever made that felt like winning. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.